Hello everyone, Yoel from Hebrew in Israel again. Today I want to do a video about the issue of Shabbat. This is going to be a little bit of a hot topic. Sometimes people say to me, why are you opening up these cans of worms? The answer is because knowledge is very, very important to me, very important for a lot of people, and I just want to try to shed some light on things. I'm not carving things in stones. I said stones deliberately because a lot of people build theologies and each one takes his own stone and runs with it. And the thing I want to talk about today is the issue of Shabbat. When exactly does Shabbat actually happen? I know of at least 3 theories when Shabbat really is, how to calculate Shabbat. One theory is a theory of a very specific individual, but we're talking about mostly about the theory of lunar Sabbath versus what we're going to call here, just for the sake of things, Jewish Sabbath. The issue is, first of all, is that there's a lot of theory in this subject and not necessarily fact. And the problem is that a lot of people do not really understand how to do proper research. Those of you who did go to university or college do understand how to do proper research. Those of you who didn't might do the correct research, might not. Now, I'm not trying to be demeaning here, but I learned the difference between real research and pseudo-research when I started going to university. And the point is very, very simple. Doing elaborate calculations and trying to start from some point in history in the Bible to try to prove the lunar Sabbath is a very, very difficult and very, very tricky thing to do. It bases off of the idea that it is the lunar Sabbath. The problem is that I've seen some of these videos and it's very questionable in my mind that the research itself is correct. However, I do remove my hat before the people who do these calculations because they're very elaborate and they're actually quite impressive. However, you have to first of all prove that there is such a thing as a lunar Sabbath. If you just go to Genesis 1, you see that there's a clear division between the 4th day when the moon is created to the sabbatical day. The Shabbat is connected to a cycle of 7 days and has absolutely nothing to do with the moon. That's number one. Number two, the argument that what Jews do today is under Babylonian influence is probably one of the most ridiculous arguments I've ever heard. Because first of all, if you know anything about cultures in the ancient Near East, especially in this tiny little bridge called the Land of Israel, is that people had influence from one another from day one. If it was culture, language, customs, worship, everything. You take temples which were built in this area, everyone's imitating from one another. You have Syrian-style temples next to Egyptian-style temples. So the thing is that to say there was a Babylonian influence is basically thinking as if the Israelites were isolated the whole time and had no influence from nowhere. But if, for example, if you just look at King Solomon's temple, the Phoenician elements in it are very, very clear. Putting cherubs on the walls, putting pillars in the front. Pillars in the front is something classic. You find it all over the place. So to think that Israelites were isolated in one tiny little place and had no influence from nowhere is almost, I would say, ridiculous. So to say that when they left Israel in the Babylonian exile, and that's where they learned the idea of keeping Shabbat on the 7th day in a 7-day cycle the way we keep it today, is just historically inaccurate. Another point, the cycle of the lunar Sabbath, and this is the exact reverse of what lunar Sabbath people say. Going according to a lunar cycle where the first day is a Sabbath, and then 7 or 8 days later, depends who you go to, is another Sabbath. That's actually clearly and very distinctly a Babylonian practice. Okay, the practice of the Shabbatu or the Sabbatu or Sabbatu, whatever name you want to give it, because there's arguments how to pronounce these things, to make the argument that Jews were influenced by Babylonian practice and then to pick up an actual known Babylonian practice and to try to say this is the original is just ridiculous. I mean, I really don't want to be offensive here, but it is ridiculous. I personally find it very, very offensive that people try to make these types of arguments, not on the fact that I'm Jewish, but on the fact that they're just basically you know, you want to say one thing and then you do the exact opposite. It's a little silly. So I highly recommend to do some research about this subject, because, for example, every Torah-keeping group that we know of, even those who were disconnected from the Jews of the land of Israel, people who were already in India and China, people who were in Egypt, and people who lived in Carthago, places like that, they kept it on a 7-day cycle. It had nothing to do with the Pharisees, nothing to do with the Jews of Jerusalem. Another very important thing, you take the Samaritans, for example, who clearly distinct themselves from Jews, they keep it on the same cycle. Okay, you take Ethiopians, who were probably in Ethiopia maybe from the end of the First Temple period. They keep it on a 7-day cycle. Okay, so from the text itself, if you look at the Torah, it's a 7-day cycle. It has almost nothing to do with the new moon. And it's very, very important to remember to distinct research from theory. Now, very important thing, to all the Lunar Sabbath people are going to go get angry with me. I would gladly see papers or videos that really explain the subject, but it's very important to first of all establish facts, and then establish your theory, and then from that come to a conclusion. Okay, to start arguing influence, not influence, you know, things like that, it's completely ignoring historical evidence. Influence always existed. People shared cultures all the time, and it's very, very important to understand. If you want to research the ancient world, you have to know how to research the ancient world, to understand how communities worked, how religions worked, how people interacted with one another. People were not isolated. By the late Bronze Age, people were traveling on boats, bringing merchandise from all over the ancient Near East from place to place, which means people met one another. And besides also the fact that there are 3 major roads that connect Asia, Asia Minor, and Africa to one another, which have existed for thousands of years, even prior to biblical times, dating to the Chalcolithic period, and even probably earlier than that. So we have to understand cultures mixed all the time. Influences existed all the time. I hope I haven't upset too many people here. I'm just giving a little bit of information here. Please remember to be polite when you respond to this. I've had people write to me things which are just not appropriate. And remember that we're all trying to walk together in Torah. We're not trying to fight one another. The moment you try to fight one another, it's not real unity. It's division, which is the exact opposite of what the Torah was supposed to give, to creating us as people who follow it. So I hope people have good comments and good questions about this subject. And again, as I said, if you have any interesting information that's actually based on real research, I will gladly look over it. Again, I will not be able to respond immediately to, because some people would send me like a whole pile of stuff. It'll take me time to go over it, and we're coming very close to exam times in university. If you do have any questions, you can get me on Hebrew in Israel, one word Hebrew in Israel, gmail.com, and I will do my best to answer your questions. Please also remember to like and subscribe to my channel.